and hand over to Deb, Professor Gagnon.
All right, thank you, Rachel. So I am going to talk today about some work that I've been doing literally since I stepped foot on the Wells campus. And that is what I'm calling an archaeological dig, which primarily took place in Macmillan Hall, which you see in the background here. So, whoops, my slides are not advancing. There we go. All right, so I'm going to start with this little preview. I just want you to take a look at these at this equipment and see if you can guess what it's about, what it's used for. This is part of what I dug up in Macmillan Hall in my archaeological dig. So no, it is not drug paraphernalia, which is kind of what it looks like. It is actually something that was used in psychological experiments. So I'm going to pose this question to you at the beginning, and at the end, I will see what you think it's about and give you the answer. Okay. All right. So first, I'd like to start with big thank yous. First of all, to all of the psych majors from 2004, when I stepped foot on campus, to the present. So everybody from Rachel all the way to Kaylin and Amy and Nona, the most recent students, and especially Rachel, who invited me to do this talk. Thank you, Rachel. I also need to give a shout out to Julie Ferguson, 76, who I've never actually met, but she wrote the definitive biography of somebody I'm going to talk about today, Margaret Floy Washburn. She did that as her senior thesis in psychology. And this has become pretty much the, I'm sorry, I'm admitting somebody here. The definitive biography of Margaret Floy Washburn. And I'd also like to thank all of the alums in attendance. Also like to thank some of the Wells staff and faculty who have supported me through this work, including some who are here today, Ken Larson and Diane Kester. Kelly Steidel has expressed an interest in this. And then there is an anonymous genealogy investigator who has added some light, shed some light on another person that I will be talking about, Ivy Campbell Fisher, who is another huge name in the history of psychology at Wells. So I want to give a shout out to them as well. All right, but mostly I need to thank Barbara Hebard, class of 2016, who really did a lot of the work that I'm going to be talking about, helped me a great deal in investigating what some of the archaeological dig dug up, as well as the history of the staff in psychology at Wells. So thank you, Barbara. And she actually presented some of this at the Eastern Psychological Association conference in New York City, which you can see on the left. And also I'd like to thank Brittany Bordeaux, class of 2013, who early on helped me basically dig up the equipment, but also clean it off because it had decades, literally decades of dust and dirt on it. So here's Brittany, and you will see her throughout as she is the most photographed person with the equipment that we dug up. Thank you, Brittany. All right, so I'd like to start with the Cayuga land acknowledgement and actually build my talk off of it. The Cayuga land acknowledgement, which was approved by the Wells College faculty in 2018, says, Wells College recognizes our collective responsibility to acknowledge our colonial history. This land is the traditional land of the Cayuga Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Wells College commits itself to ensuring the traditions and culture of Indigenous peoples are embraced and reflected upon in order to engage in solidarity with the Cayuga Nation. So what I'd like to start with feeding off of that land acknowledgement is to acknowledge our colonial history and to acknowledge that psychology in general, Western psychology, as well as Wells psychology, is a colonial history. So I need to acknowledge that. And I would like to start with this quote from Hermann Ebbinghaus from 1908. Hermann Ebbinghaus is a huge figure in the history of psychology. But one of the things that he's most known for is this sort of paradoxical quote. Psychology has a long past, but a short history. Probably all of my students in the audience have heard me say this because we talk about it in our foundations and methods class. How is it that psychology has a long past, but a short history? Well, the long past starts in ancient Greece with Aristotle and Plato. Aristotle and Plato started to ask the questions that today we are still asking in psychology. They asked questions about epistemology. Epistemology is the philosophical study of knowledge, how we know what we know, which is really the study of the mind, how the mind processes and represents information. How do we know what we know? Knowledge. And they also ask questions about human nature. In other words, why do we behave the way we do, right? So today, in modern times, we describe or define the study of psychology as the scientific study of mind and behavior. Really, it's the same questions that Aristotle and Plato were asking way back in ancient Greece. So that's the long past. The short history begins in 1879 in Leipzig, Germany, with Wilhelm Wundt. He's widely considered the father of academic psychology. He began the first academic research lab in Leipzig, at the University of Leipzig. And it was there that psychology became an independent field of study. It left its roots of philosophy, which was really about logic and rationalization, armchair psychology, if you will. It also left the field of physiology, which is the other main branch of psychology, in that it left studying the body and started to study the mind and behavior, the soul, if you will. So philosophy and physiology came together and adopted the methods of science to study mind and behavior. And Wundt was the first person to do that and set up a lab to do so. So in this picture, well, first of all, what you see is a bunch of guys, white European men, again, European colonial history here, but you also see a lot of equipment that really is all about measuring mind and behavior in terms of reaction time and accuracy. So just keep that in mind, what you see on this bench here, this lab. All right, so that's where the short history of psychology begins in Germany, Leipzig, Germany, 1879. Edward Titchener was a student of Wundt's in Germany. He is credited with bringing that science over to the United States, and not so far away from here, in fact, just a mile from where I'm speaking right now, to Cornell University. So the arrival in America of Western psychology, academic psychology, happened right at our footsteps, right at our doorsteps in upstate New York. Literally, I drive it every day, 25 miles from Wells College. So Titchener is widely considered to be the father of American academic psychology. And here is the building where it happened. Not the room where it happened, like in Hamilton, but the building where it happened, which is Morrill Hall on Cornell University's campus, still standing today, one of the 3 original buildings of Cornell University, the building where it happened. birthplace of American academic psychology. I just have to, as an aside, note that we are in a place that has always been a hotbed of new things. So, excuse me, I just needed to admit somebody else.
Deb, I'll keep an eye on that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
It just keeps popping up. And so some of those things, I mean, it's just incredible where we live and where, you guys went to school, those of you who are alums and don't live here now. Government, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy is, the cornerstone of our democracy, of our Constitution. The activism and social justice that took place in this area, abolitionists and suffragists. I used Emily Holland's picture specifically to represent the suffragists because of her connection to Wells College and Aurora and Ledyard, et cetera. Frederick Douglass. It's also for science, the science of neurology, neuroscience, phrenology, which turned out to be a false view of neuroscience. But yet, this is where phrenology was really a big deal. It's where it took off. This is down in the lower right corner is a broadside from a local publication of phrenology. And psychology, as I already pointed out, was born here, American psychology. Religion, the burnt out district was all over central and western New York, revivalism. It is the birthplace of a whole religion, Mormonism, okay? Commerce and transportation, the Erie Canal, and what that opened up. And then finally, a hotbed of education, Cornell and indeed Wells were forefronts in the education frontier in this country. Okay, so what was going on in Wells College, at this time? So it, as you all know, began in 1868. It was founded by Henry Wells in 1868 as a women's college, women's seminary, and all we know, thanks to the work that Barbara Hubbard helped me do and dig up, is that there was an instructor in mental, moral, and physical sciences and a curator of cabinets named Jane E. Johnson, who presided from 1873 to 1875 as the acting lady principal, which I can only surmise was probably equivalent to the dean of the college or maybe the dean of students, basically presided over the college. But from 1868 to 1876, she instructed mental, moral, and physical sciences. That's a lot, right? Mental, moral, and physical sciences. In the day, and I'm just going to read from something I have here. It was common for women faculty members to live on campus with students. Their responsibilities extended beyond classroom instruction, for they were expected to assist in the social and moral development of students as well. So this is not unusual that she would have so many duties, responsible for the mental and physical sciences, but also the moral development of students. But she was also the curator of cabinets. And I italicize that because it is those cabinets, those very cabinets, that when I arrived at Wells, I discovered held gems. And I thank Jane E. Johnson for curating cabinets and whoever followed her in that role, because, and I'm thankful that nobody ever thought to clear them out, because it allowed me in 2004 to come upon them and discover I was like a kid in a candy shop, to be honest. All right, so this begins the storytelling of my journey. And this also comes from the land acknowledgement, ensuring that the traditions and culture of indigenous peoples are embraced. Part of that culture and tradition of the Haudenosaunee is storytelling. And the winter months are good times for contemplation, reflection, and sharing and storytelling. So I'm happy that I am doing this in January, which is a great month for storytelling. So I want to tell you my story at this point. As I said, I came to Wells in 2004. This picture of me that I asked Rachel to use for the Learning by the Lake posting is from about the time that I landed at Wells. And when I did, the picture you're seeing on the right is room 302, Macmillan Hall. And those of you who are alums might remember that Macmillan Hall is very oddly numbered. All of the even numbered rooms are on the north side, and all the odd number rooms are on the south side. And so if you're trying to find room 302, don't go to room 301 expecting that it'll be next to it, right? 302 was across from my office, it turned out. And 302 held this cabinet that Jane Johnson probably curated because it seemingly was the original cabinet when I arrived. Macmillan Hall has not changed much since 1896 or whatever. I'm sorry, I can't remember the year. But anyway, it has not changed much since it was built. Here's the cabinet cleaned out. This is after I got at it and dug out everything and cleaned it all out and rearranged it. But this is the cabinet in room 302, Macmillan, which was historically claimed as the psychology classroom. Rachel probably remembers this room, right?
Yeah, but I've never seen that. I've never noticed the cabinets.
Right, because you see that screen there?
Yeah.
In modern days, that screen was always down and we used it to, right? So nobody really paid attention to that cabinet, but I did. So my archaeological dig involved mostly Macmillan Hall, but then when the sciences moved out of Zabriskie and into the new Stratton Hall, all sorts of other things got dug up. So it extended to Zabriskie Hall at that point. So here's the two buildings where a lot of the psychology artifacts were to be found and dug up in my archaeological dig. All right, so here is just a hodgepodge of, melange of some of the things that I dug up in Macmillan, from the cabinets, from the closets, from the cupboards. Those of you who have been on the north side of Macmillan Hall, they're still there, those white cupboards. You pull, they're like drawers that you pull. Nobody probably ever opened them for decades. When I did, I found all sorts of very interesting things. And I can tell that they weren't open for decades because the papers that I found in there were dated, 1940, 1930, student papers, exams, notebooks. It was crazy. All of this equipment that you see here was covered in layers of dust, just disgusting. And poor Brittany, who you see in some of these photos, helped me uncover and clean them off, etc. So, so that was, sort of the discovery period. Then fast forward, I tried my best as an experimental psychologist. This fascinated me. Like I said, I was a kid in a candy store. I was in graduate school from 1986 to 1993. I straddled the era of, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you see this box right here? Can you see that? Yeah. So this box right here is the response box. This is the kind of thing that I actually used when I started out as a graduate student, because computer experimental computerized experiments were just not there yet. By the time I finished my graduate studies, everything was computerized. But I really straddled that. We didn't have word processors when I was an undergrad, and when I started graduate school, by the time I finished, we did. So I really straddled both worlds, this old school, pushing buttons on a hand-built, home-built response box, to pushing buttons on a keyboard on a computer. So this stuff just fascinated me. Most of it I could tell was hand-built, like this thing over here, which is a light discrimination box. This is a sonometer, which allows you to test different frequency discrimination. This is a memory box nowadays. So this drum here would show subjects single syllable nonsense words one at a time, and it would show them precisely, 1 per second, perhaps, whatever rate it was set for. Nowadays, that would be done on a computer, obviously. Somebody built these things, and that just fascinated me. So I start some of the equipment that I uncovered, however, I could not identify. Most of it I could from my experience, but a lot of it was just, foreign and a mystery and a puzzle that I wanted to solve. So fortunately, we have the Center for Psychology at the University of Akron, the Cummings Center for the History of Psychology, and also the Archives of the History of American Psychology is housed there as well. And this is where Barbara came in, Barbara Hubbard, class of 2016. She and I, in one semester, sat down and we tried to identify, using the databases that this center and archives has, tried to identify what some of the mystery equipment was. And we, by and large, succeeded, because folks like us at Wells have donated the equipment to the Cummings Center and to the archives so that it can be, archived for others and logged, etc., so that people like us can use it. Researchers can use it to do their research like this. So I just want to say that when we did uncover some equipment in Zabriskie, one of the things that we uncovered were about a dozen or so Skinner boxes, which you see here with Brittany. So Skinner boxes were, all the rage in the 50s when animal learning behavior was being studied. And I figured we don't need 15 Skinner boxes at Wells. I kept one and gave it to the Wells archives to put, to keep on hand. And I've got one in my office, but I donated the other 12 or so to this Cummings Center in memory of Dr. Shelby Harris, who was a longstanding Wells psychology faculty member from 1961 to 1991, who did do learning and memory research. So I thought it was befitting that we donate our equipment to the center in his behalf. But as far as Barbara and I were able to do, which was a lot, we identified almost all of the equipment. There still are some mysteries that remain, such as this gizmo. No idea what this is. Obviously it is handmade. Someday I will make my way to Akron and bring it with me and ask them to identify it. But this is one of the mysteries also residing in my office right now. So a lot of psychology, early psychology was on the measurement of sensory systems. That seemed like the logical first place to apply scientific methods, was to understanding the sensory systems, because they're the closest thing to physical that we have in psychology. So the field of psychophysics was really the first area of psychology. When Wilhelm Wundt started his lab in Leipzig, this is what he was studying, was psychophysics. Measuring things like thresholds, just noticeable differences, and discrimination. So a lot of the equipment that we dug up was used to measure that sort of thing, like discrimination in this box, visual perimetry, measuring people's visual peripheral vision, tuning forks used to measure auditory frequency response, the sonometer, again, auditory frequency, spatial gradients. This is really very not great material, but this was, I can tell, used to measure visual spatial gradients. And then also, I found some of the stimuli that were used to study verbal learning and memory, a la Ebbinghaus. Ebbinghaus, his big area in psychology was verbal learning and memory. Here's some more slides. Same thing, using a Sperling, it's called a Sperling test in visual memory. Again, our memory box. Response boxes to measure reaction time. Mueller-Lyer illusion. Most of my students will recognize this, because I like to bring this into class. Okay, so moving on in my personal story, I was presenting a poster at the National Institute on the Teaching of Psychology, which is held every year in January at St. Pete's Beach, Florida. And this gentleman, who every good psychology student or graduate student will recognize as the man in this history of psychology, Ludi Benjamin, approached me, and I, immediately was like, at attention. And he looked at my poster and he said, "Wells College." He said, "I think that's where Margaret Floy Washburn was." And I was like, "What?" That was news to me. Margaret Floy Washburn. So he wasn't sure, but you better believe I went back to Wells, and lo and behold, Margaret Floy Washburn was at Wells from 1894 to 1900. And the reason this is such a big deal is because she was the first woman to earn a PhD in psychology. Very first woman. And don't you know, her first job after getting that PhD was to be chair of philosophy, psychology, and ethics at Wells. How about that? So that's a huge claim to fame. Margaret Floy Washburn, president of the American Psychological Association, as a woman in the early 1900s, elected to the National Academy of Sciences, began the Journal of Psychology, widely considered to be the mother of the field of comparative psychology, began her career at Wells College. Here's an excerpt from Washburn's National Academy of Sciences biography. On obtaining the PhD degree in 1994, she gladly accepted the chair of psychology, philosophy, and ethics, not to mention logic, at Wells College, because psychology, philosophy, and ethics is not enough, also logic. I've included a course evaluation from a student of Titchener's. Titchener, any student of psychology, the history of psychology, knows that Titchener was quite a pip. He was known to be extremely arrogant and well, I'll just leave it at that. But this is a pretty funny course evaluation. Not really a course evaluation. It's an evaluation. As a student, I was most stimulated by, and the student is supposed to name the teachers that most influenced them, E.B. Titchener, and they named some others. And then at the end, it says, but not enough to list here. Titchener was the dominant figure, usually referred to as the LGA, Lord God Almighty, just to give you an idea. So it's interesting that Washburn, that he took Washburn as a student. She did not start at Cornell. She started at Columbia. You might remember that Titchener did not arrive at Cornell until 1892, and yet Washburn graduated in 1894. It'd be hard to complete a PhD in 2 years, but the reason she did is because she started in Columbia. But it was clear that Columbia was not going to grant her a doctorate. But Cornell was more open to, it was always open to women students. And so she ended up at Cornell and earned her PhD there. So Wells has quite a direct psychological or intellectual parentage, direct from Wundt, considered the father of academic psychology, to Titchener, to Washburn. So, you know, that's really quite something, a direct lineage. Post-Wells, Washburn did a short stint at the University of Cincinnati, but then she ended her career at Vassar College, which was really very close to her hometown of Kingston in the Hudson Valley. She was born in New York City, but moved at a young age to Kingston. So she always, as was the custom of the day, worked in a women's college. Her her area was memory, but she also studied extensively in the animal mind, animal cognition. And I think that she would be happy to know that just this past fall, I offered a course in animal cognition, which to my knowledge is the first time a course like that has been offered at Wells since she was there. And I think that's you know, a continuation of that legacy. Next, I'd like to end with another figure that I came across as a result of my archaeological dig. And this person is not quite as well known in the annals of psychology, but equally as prolific and productive as Margaret Floy Washburn. And her name is Ivy Campbell Fisher. She was at Wells from 1916 to 1948. She's the longest serving female Wells faculty in psychology, as Barbara and I discovered. She earned her PhD at Clark University in 1914. So also, you know, this is a time when women and people of color were not very commonly allowed in higher, you know, doctoral programs. So this is quite something. She founded the first department of aesthetics in the United States at Wells. And just as a little aside or anecdote, when I came to Wells, a faculty member, Laura Purdy, who was a professor of philosophy at the time, asked me, and I didn't quite understand why, but she asked me if I could teach aesthetics. And at the time, I didn't understand that there was a history of aesthetics at Wells. Now I understand. Aesthetics was a big deal at Wells. As I said, Ivy began the first department of aesthetics at Wells. So she published extensively in the area of aesthetics and sensation and perception of art. She published articles that we dug up called Aesthetics and the Logic of Sense, Static and Dynamic Principles in Art, Intrinsic Expressiveness, and the like. So Ivy Campbell Fisher studied under G. Stanley Hall, another huge name in the history of psychology. Hall was the first to earn a PhD in psychology in the United States. He founded the American Psychological Association, the American Journal of Psychology, and Clark University, which ostensibly was created as a school for psychology. However, like Titchener, he had sort of a shady background. He was a eugenicist, and he did not believe women belonged in higher ed, except in women's colleges and for teaching home economics. So he did teach Ivy Campbell Fisher, who was Ivy Campbell at the time, but it was to the end of teaching in a women's college, which is where he felt women belonged. So I did find in the archaeological dig some evidence of eugenic type research, and also a lot of Ivy's stimuli that she used in her research, a lot of which revolves around what we would call Gestalt psychology, understanding the organization of visual stimuli, visual organization. So she, I've got some of the actual slides that she used in her experiments, which is just phenomenal. So recently, an individual who is studying actually Ivy Campbell's husband, Lou Fisher, and I intersected as she was doing some genealogical research, and gave me a lot of insight into Ivy's life during the time that she lived in Aurora, which was over 30 years. Here's a picture that Barbara dug up from a yearbook, a Cardinal yearbook. Looks like Ivy is holding a cat. This is her here, and one of her junior psychology faculty members here. And it turns out that Ivy's life in Aurora on Cayuga, mostly she was single. She lived in Ledyard with two other, she apparently boarded other faculty members, lived with two other single Wells teachers, both age 32. In the 1930 census, she was listed as head of household in Ledyard still, with two boarders, a teacher and a laborer at Wells. But by 1940, she was living in Aurora with her husband, Louis Fisher, who's listed as a college teacher, but with zero income, compared to her income of $4,000 a year. It's probably a large amount at that time. And this individual described to me the Jordan Club, which is an Adirondack summer colony group that her husband Lou saved from extinction in the mid 1900s. Here's a picture of Lou and Ivy in the Adirondacks on the Racket River in a canoe. And finally, I just want to say that probably Ivy would be really happy to know that although I don't teach aesthetics, I do teach two courses that she'd probably be happy to know about: the psychology of art, and here's one of my classes holding masks that they made, and I also teach sensation perception, which is very closely related to aesthetics and Gestalt psychology. So with that, I'd like to ask if anybody has any idea what this paraphernalia is, what it's used for in the study of psychology. Any clues other than Barbara? No? Okay, then I guess I will just tell you.
Rebecca said, is it perception of odors?
No, but that's such a good guess, because we do use little microtubes for odor testing. That was a great guess. No, I'm trying to share my screen again. I'm sorry. Okay, well, I'm having trouble getting back to sharing my screen for some reason. Oh, here it is. Okay, I'm sorry. Can you see that? Can you see that, Rachel?
Yeah, so how do you say it? Quinky?
Quinky tubes. Yes, they're called Quinky tubes. So what you do, they're used for creating it, kind of like, you know, when you blow across a open Pepsi or Coke glass or bottle, depending on how full the bottle is, it creates a different frequency of sound. Quinky tubes have differing lengths, and you blow in them and they create different frequencies based on the length of the tube. So this is a really old-fashioned way of creating pitches, different pitches, and testing frequency perception. Yeah.
That's wild.
So yeah, Quinky tubes. All right. So that's my archaeological dig and the result of it and what I've learned. I think, you know, Wells has such a rich history in the field of psychology. And I'm really happy to share it with you, especially with these two luminary figures in the, you know, history of women in psychology, especially.
This is so awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to drop my email address and in the alum office and Deb's email address in the chat, just so if anybody has any follow-up questions. But I'm going to mute myself and I won't mute myself, but I'm going to help with Q&A. So you can drop questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand with the little reactions button on the bottom. And if it's a flurry of people, then I'll help navigate that. But yeah, ask away, comment away. Thank you so much.